Okay, shalom everyone, and welcome to Bits of Torah Truths. And this week we're on Parashat Bo. And I posted the link in the room, MATSATI.com. I posted again. There's a link, and you can download the PDF at the bottom of that page. And so in Parashat Bo, it covers Exodus chapter 10 through chapter 13, verse 16. And I titled it this week, The Rabbis Agree, okay? And the reason I wrote the Torah portion this week the way I did was because of what I had read in Midrash Rabbah, and I thought this was really fascinating within Midrash Rabbah. And, you know, before I begin reading this, that David Negley had posted a teaching on in his Mishkan David on Facebook, and I listened to it. And the thing that I took away from his audio teaching was what the most important thing was that when we're reading the scriptures like the apostolic writings, and we see that the apostles, or we see scriptures that are used in reference like to Isaiah, as in Yeshua fulfilled this prophetic message of him in Isaiah, that a lot of times that we come away with the idea that this was something new. But the fact is that this is a teaching that comes right out from the rabbis, okay? And something that was a expectation, a future expectation, what the Messiah was going to do and who he was. And when we read these things in the scriptures, that he fulfilled these texts, that this distinctly rabbinic thing, an expectation of the Messiah, the future Messiah. And when I was reading through Midrash Rabbah this week on Parashat Bo, is it Parashat Bo or Vayira? I think it is Bo. I forgot to change the PDF. I'll have to change that. But anyway, so let me go through. It is Bo this week, yeah. Let me go through the study, and I hope you'll see what I mean. And so in this week's study from Parashat Bo, we read about the last plagues that God brought upon Egypt, and how Pharaoh drives the children of Israel out of the land. And the Lord tells Moshe in Exodus chapter 10, verse 1, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may perform these signs of mine among them." The Lord's hardening in part is for the purpose of performing these signs to deliver Israel with a mighty hand. The scriptures say that the Lord brought the plague of locusts upon Egypt, then darkness upon the land, and then we read of the death of the firstborn, and then the Lord's Passover. And studying the Torah from a historical perspective, this point in Israel's history is the beginning of months, the beginning of the salvation of the God, the beginning of a new covenant, and the beginning of a new relationship with the Lord God Almighty for Israel. And a unique thing about the Passover is its connection to the beginning of months and the beginning of the salvation of God for Israel. And the blood of the lamb is used as a sign upon the doorpost, such that the angel of death would pass over the house and the firstborn would not die. And the scriptures tell us that the Lord declares this to be an everlasting statute that is to be remembered and not forgotten. And so this week's reading records a very important time in Israel's history regarding the deliverance of God. And based upon these scriptures and considering the history of Israel, many questions are brought to mind, and specifically those that are related to the Messiah, Yeshua, and Passover. And where I got these questions here that I'm about to read was watching some of the discussions on Facebook, and the idea behind why did Yeshua have to die during Passover, and was his death a sin sacrifice for Passover, and what is the significance of having died during the Passover? And I saw responses that I saw a Christian pastor say, yes, it was a sin sacrifice. And I saw other people say, no, it wasn't. The Passover wasn't meant to be, according to the Torah, a sin sacrifice. And it wasn't, But then why did Yeshua have to die during Passover? Why did he choose this time, And I think that this really comes out in Midrash Rabbah. And the scriptures that we're looking at specifically in this week's study is from Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. And that says the following. It says, Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month, they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their fathers' households, a lamb for each household. Now, if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor nearest to his house are to take one according to the number of persons in them. According to what each man should eat, you are to divide the lamb. Okay, and that was Exodus 12, verses 1 through 4. Okay, so this week's reading from Midrash Rabbah provides us a great example
on the rabbinic methodology of biblical interpretation, how the apostolic writings in the Testament are consistent with the manner of interpretation taught by the sages of Israel. And many times when anti-missionaries come, they bring with them the idea that the New Testament's description of the Messiah is not consistent with the Tanakh's description of the Messiah, and that the rabbinic interpretation is significantly different, when in reality that is not always necessarily the case. And in this week's reading from both the Torah and from Midrash Rabbah, it shows one such case where the rabbis do in fact agree with the apostolic account of the Messiah. The rabbis discuss these very important events in Israel's history from Parashat Bo and provide for us a very intelligent answer for the anti-missionary who claims that Yeshua is not the Messiah of God. So, in Midrash Rabbah on Parashat Bo, the rabbis spend a good amount of time discussing the Dibor HaMathil, the opening phrase, that says, This month will be unto you the beginning of months. So they look at verse 1 of Exodus 12, and then there's Midrash after Midrash after Midrash in Midrash Rabbah Parashat 15 that just talks on this one phrase, this month will be unto you the beginning of months. And they have the following to say concerning the opening verse of Exodus 12, and in the very first Midrash, in Parashat 15 from Midrash Rabbah Shemot. And that says the following. I have it quoted here on page 2. It says, and I truncated a little bit because it was so long. There's so much that they just in part 1. So I showed the important parts here in the study. And it says the following. It says, And the Lord spoke unto me, This will be unto you the beginning of months. So there's the Dibor HaMathil, the opening phrase. And rabbis say that here is another explanation of this month will be unto you the beginning of months. God is in a way called first, as it says, I am the first and I am the last. Isaiah 44:6. Zion is called first, as it says, You throne of glory on high from the first, or the beginning. You place of our sanctuary. And they quote from Jeremiah 7:12. Esau was called first, for it says, And the first came forth ruddy. Genesis 25, verse 25. And the Messiah is called first, for it says, The first, the harbinger unto Zion will I give. Behold, behold, who is called first will come and build the temple which is called first, and will exact retribution from Esau, also called first. Then will Messiah, who is called first, come in the first month, as it is said, This month will be unto you the beginning of months. Okay, and that was from Midrash Rabbah Shemot, Parashat 15, part 1. And in this Midrash, the rabbis draw a parallel to the first month as the beginning of months, to Lord God in heaven, to Zion in the sanctuary, to Esau, and to the Messiah who is called first. And it's interesting how the rabbis call both God and his Messiah first. And this may be related to the idea that the Lord God will raise up the Messiah, bringing with him the salvation of God. The Agadic tradition taken from the Midrash reveals the rabbinic understanding on the Messiah, that his connection to the Lord in these events and how he would come at his appointed time, the Messiah's appointed time, would be at this time of year and in the beginning of months. And why do the rabbis consider this month so significant that warrants this type of interpretation? And I feel that this was an expectation, a rabbinic expectation of the coming of the true Messiah, the Messiah of God, and for the salvation of his people. At this particular time, we find here in the Midrash this expectation. And when we read on in the Midrashim, part 11 sheds light on what this particular time in the coming of the Messiah means. And so on page 3, part 11, I have quoted here, and it says the following. It says, "Another explanation, this month will be unto you. It's written, happy is a nation whose God is the Lord. When God chose his world, he appointed new moons, or months, and years therein. And when he chose Jacob and his sons, appointed for the new moon of redemption, in which Israel were redeemed from Egypt, and in which they are destined to be redeemed again, as it says, in the day of coming forth of Egypt, will I show unto him marvelous things." And they quote from Micah chapter 7, verse 15. In this month was Isaac born. In this month he was bound as a sacrifice. In this month also Jacob received the blessings, and in this month did he hint unto Israel that it would be to them the beginning of salvation. For it says, it will be the first of the month of the year, the first month of the year to you. It can be compared to a king who brought his son out of prison and commanded, "Celebrate for all times a day of rejoicing, the day on which my son went forth from darkness to light, from an iron yoke to life, from servitude to freedom, from bondage to redemption." Similarly, God brought Israel out of captivity, for it says, he brings out the prisoners unto prosperity. And from darkness and the shadow of death, as it says, he brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death. From a yoke of iron to the yoke of Torah. From slavery to freedom, as it says, you are the children of the Lord your God. From servitude to redemption, as the Redeemer strong, Lord of hosts is his name. And hence did he fix this month as a season of rejoicing for them, that he had avenged them of their enemies, as it is said, therefore I will give men for you. Okay, and so that was a shorter midrash, and that was part 11. And you can see all of the meaning that the rabbis are bringing out in time of the year. According to Midrash Shemot, Parashat 15, part 11, the Lord God chose new moons to mark the festivals of Israel, and these new moons were chosen for the purpose of redemption. The rabbis call this month the month of the new moon of redemption. The proof texts that are given are that Isaac was born in this month, and that he was bound by Abraham as a sacrifice in this month. I thought that was really fascinating. And the Midrash continues saying that Jacob received the blessing in this month, and that it was hinted at that this month would be the beginning of the salvation of Israel. A parable of a king who released his son is used to illustrate these things. And that, well, again, it said it can be compared to a king who brought his son out of prison and commanded, "Celebrate for all times a day of rejoicing, the day on which my son went forth from darkness to light, from an iron yoke to life, from servitude to freedom, and from bondage to redemption." Similarly, God brought Israel out of captivity, for it says he brings out prisoners unto prosperity, from darkness and the shadow of death, as it says he brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death, and from a yoke of iron to the yoke of Torah, and from slavery to freedom, as it says, you are the children of the Lord your God. And based upon these two midrashim,
Is it surprising why Yeshua laid down his life during the Passover according to the apostolic writings? I don't think it's very surprising. The scriptures, both the Tanakh and the apostolic writings, say that all have fallen short of the glory of God, and that there is no one who is righteous. Every person needs atonement before God. And so when we study atonement and the sacrifice according to the Torah, the Passover lamb is not defined as a sin sacrifice. The Torah describes the atonement sacrifice as being both a national and individual basis. For example, Yom Kippur is known as a Day of Atonement. It's a holy day where atonement is done national by the Kohen Gadol, that Yeshua is our Kohen Gadol in Hebrews chapter. In Exodus 12 verse 3 it describes that each and every individual needs to participate in the Passover sacrifice. In verse 3 of Exodus 12 it says, "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month they are each one to take a lamb for themselves according to their father's household, a lamb for each household." And notice the way in which the verse is written. Each household is to take for himself a lamb and place the blood upon the doorposts, the mezuzot, the doorposts. And as we read on further in the Torah, verse 6, it states that all the people of the community of Israel must slaughter the Passover lamb. And this describes an individual participation from house to house, where in each individual case the blood is placed on the doorpost to cause the angel of death to pass over. The sacrifices that were prescribed as part of the covenant relationship are set forth. And let me talk a little bit this covenant relationship and the sacrifice, because I've heard it taught that in the Old Testament man had to earn his salvation by bringing the sacrifice, and in the New we have grace. And I'm under the belief now, after many years of studying the Torah, year after year, that the sacrifices were to be brought as a result of our being in a covenant relationship with God. It was not as a means for us to earn our salvation or to get ourselves saved, And the idea is that the sacrifices were brought because we are in a covenant with God, and these are the stipulations of the covenant. And the sacrifices were not meant to be a means for man, working his way. And the point is that, like when the Apostle Paul was in Acts, he was taking the vow of the Nazarite, and he performed as a conclusion of his vow that he performed a whole offering, a sin offering, and a peace offering. And the question is that if he is in the Messiah, was at that time, he believed in Yeshua as the Messiah, and then how can he go back and offer these sacrifices, especially a sin offering, in the temple? And I believe that the point is that it was not meant to earn salvation. They were a means for directing us to a future expectation of what God was going to do in the Messiah, and in the stipulations of a covenant relationship that we have with Him. So, with that being said, that the sacrifices were in the study here. The sacrifices were prescribed as a part of the covenant relationship that are set forth in Leviticus. And according to the Torah, there are two types of sacrifices: the ones that are with blood and the ones that are bloodless. And like the grain offering is bloodless. And the sacrifices, these types of sacrifices were dependent upon the nature and the purpose of offering.
Were ascribed as well to a place upon measure. Sacrifices were missional and subliminally categorized in the following way. 1 as burnt offerings, 2 as thank or peace offerings, 3 as sin or trespass offerings, and 4 as purification offerings. And in the case of the sin offering, the scriptures tell us in Leviticus 4, verses 1 through 2, "Now the Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a person sins unintentionally
against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which ought not to be done, and does any of them, then he is supposed to do this, that, and the other. And if a person sins unintentionally, that's what the scriptures say. The idea is not so much that there is an accidental sin, but of a sin committed by a person who loves God. And this is contrasted to the one who sins presumptuously, according to Numbers chapter 15, verse 30. There is no atonement available for the one whose heart was turned away from the Lord in presumptuous sin. We also read this in Hebrews chapter 10. That there's some commentary on that in the apostolic writings. And if one's heart wasn't turned towards the Lord, then all the sacrifices offered in the world would not have been approved of. And the point is that those who are in a current relationship with God, according to our individual sin, he is to bring a sacrifice for his sins. And in a similar manner, the Lord instructed all of Israel to be active and involved in the Passover lamb, which is to be done on an individual basis, a house-by-house basis. And I feel that this draws in or brings in the context for from the rabbi's interpretation on this is the beginning of months, the Messiah, and then our understanding of who Yeshua is, why he had to die during or just before the Passover, etc. And so based upon this study thus far, we can make the following conclusions, and I'm on page 5 of the study. 1, the beginning of months is a very special time filled with agadic traditions that speak of the salvation of God and the Messiah. 2, the rabbis equate this time period to redemption, salvation, and the Messiah. 3, significant events throughout biblical history are believed to have occurred at this time. The birth of Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac, the Edom, and Jacob receiving the blessing, implying that there was this beginning of the salvation of Israel, etc. And so, according to the traditions, that there were significant events throughout biblical history are believed to have occurred at this time. And then 4, setting straight one's life to get right with God prior to celebrating the Passover was an important thing to do. Very important. And this is important to note that also something else that's important to note is that one would not bring a sin offering during the Passover festival. That one would have, however, prepared himself just prior to the Passover so that one could be joyful during this time, since it is a time of remembering the freedom from slavery and the redemption of God. And if a sin sacrifice would have been an appropriate way to get right with God, then and with the Lord, then fulfilling one's obligation before the Lord, sacrifice would have been brought for sin and purity before the start of Passover. And interesting enough, that apostolic writings, Yeshua's death occurred just prior to the Passover. And in his death, he brought the salvation of God, which is marked by this particular festival in a very significant way. And based upon the rabbinic commentary, Yeshua's sacrifice is connected to the Passover for this very reason. The beginning of the months, it is the time when the Messiah would come to save Israel, to bring the redemption of God with him. And Yeshua laid down his life freely in order that the scriptures would be fulfilled. That's based upon a rabbinic expectation, on from the prophets, the writings in the Torah. And that's exactly what happened. And Yeshua chose to die as our Passover lamb, which is something to be remembered for all time. And in Parashat Bo, the Lord brought these great miracles to deliver Israel with a mighty hand. And in a similar manner, the Lord our Father in heaven performed a miracle of biblical proportions by raising the dead. And he raised Yeshua to life from the grave, showing him to be victorious over death. And as a result, we can celebrate for all time this great day of rejoicing, the day on which the Son of God went forth, freeing us from the yoke, the iron yoke of sin and death, to life, and to life, life in him, life in his ways and in freedom, and from servitude to freedom, from bondage to redemption. And all I think I can say is what a wonderful God we serve, and what a blessing it is to be able to look at the rabbinic commentary and see these things, see these future expectations of who Messiah was, who Yeshua is. And when now, after I had listened to what David Negley had said, and it just got me thinking that now when I go through the apostolic writings, through the New Testament, and I see all these references to Isaiah and the Psalms and the Torah and whatnot, and Yeshua being fulfilling these, living these things out, and doing these things. What I have in my mind now is that there was a rabbinic expectation of of these scriptures in the Messiah, and so I thought this was a really, really neat portion this week. So that concludes the study. Anyone have any questions? I'll release the mic.